Hello to my fellow history lovers. We are on to part four of the fascinating story of Thomas Paine. So, if you will remember, he has had this meteoric rise. He comes to America and he writes Common Sense, which convinces people monarchies, maybe they're not such a good idea. Maybe we should go along with this rebellion. And then he writes the crisis papers, the American Crisis, where he says, these are the times that try men's soul. This is the low point in the war. And the sunshine patriot, who won't stick by us is not worthy of anything. And Washington has this read aloud to his troops before the Battle of Trenton. Powerful writer. And then he even is with Washington when Washington triumphantly rides into New York at 1783, end of the war. Things are going well. And then, as we said, he's thinking freedom for everybody. And so he's off to join more or less, the French argue for the French Revolution. Meanwhile, Washington is trying to hold together a pretty fragile new country. So where we left off in this whole thing about let's have freedom for everyone, he writes a book called The Rights of Men, and he publishes that in England, and it is scathingly against any kind of monarchy. And so, not surprisingly, the British, who are a monarchy, ordered an arrest for him for sedition. Where he makes his mistake is he actually dedicates it to Washington, thinking Washington will think the same way. But Washington is now in a different situation. Many of the founders, including Washington, not only are we in an economic nightmare, basically, the coffers are empty, but we have a really, really tiny standing army, an almost non-existent navy. We're dependent on foreign trade. We can't really tick off anybody or get into a war at this point. On top of that, by this point in Washington's career, he has dealt with a couple things that make that whole French Revolution look pretty dangerous. And the first one was called the Newburgh Conspiracy. So a lot of officers weren't paid, and they start circulating anonymous letters that if Congress basically doesn't pay them, that they might actually go there and overthrow Congress. So they start hinting at a true overthrow of the government. And this really spooks Washington because it is he's looking at an armed army, basically saying we may not disband like we're supposed to, and we may go overthrow the Congress that we actually just fought to create. He's also dealt with, I think it was called Shays Rebellion. I wrote that down. Yeah, Shays Rebellion, where farmers who were facing foreclosure, they start sending armed farmers, to block the courts so that the judges can't get in and issue foreclosure warnings. And Washington, again, is looking at that thinking, wow, if the court system falls apart, this whole thing can fall apart. So now you look across at the French Revolution, which is what Paine is all for, and you're thinking liberty without guardrails is pretty dangerous. So they're getting farther apart, and we'll see what happens next.